Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Sean, and I'm going to be talking about the book A Street Cat Named Bob and how he changed my life. So this book was really good. I really enjoyed it, and I even watched the movie too. It's a very, very good story, compelling story, truly inspiring, and at times an emotional story as well. So this book's an autobiography written by James Bowen. So James Bowen, he's a busker, or a street performer as they call him, who lived in the streets of London, and he would do this street performing. His act was, he was a musician, so he would play his acoustic guitar and roam the streets and collect money, and all the while he was doing this to support his heroin addiction. So in the book he claims it was 10 years where he was off and on living homeless and in accommodating housing and shelters, and he had no stability, no family support, nothing. And it was really hard on him. So a lot of the time he was lonely on the street, and he resorted towards narcotics and heroin to make him feel better. And yeah, so this was a really dark time in James's life, and he had this social worker that was, I guess, looking out for him, because he had been in and out of pretty bad accommodated shelters where he was surrounded by other addicts, and it was really bad for him trying to get clean. He would be clean for a while, and then he would relapse, and it just wasn't a good environment for him. And then one day he got lucky, and he got put into an accommodated shelter where there weren't any other addicts. It was just a normal living environment, and this was great for him. There were normal families around, no addicts. It was a chance for him to start new and kind of get a hold of his life. And it was at this moment in the book where he met a ginger cat, or an orange cat, and this cat was sitting on a mat down the hall from his apartment, or his flat as they say in London, and this cat was just sitting there, looked hungry. He was describing its fur as very mangy and just not looking good. So he finds this cat and he brings him inside, and hangs out with him for a day or two, and kind of really gets to liking him and doesn't have anything to call him, so he names him Bob. He really likes the name. He watches the show Twin Peaks, and one of the characters' names is Bob, so he named him Bob. And after hanging out with him for a little while, he noticed that Bob had a huge cut on his back leg, and it looked like it could have been from a dog or a fox, he says. And it doesn't look good. It's infected, it's draining pus, and he's not sure what to do. He doesn't know how to fix it. He cleans it himself in his sink, but it still doesn't look that great. So him and Bob go to the local RSPCA, and James is under the impression that at the RSPCA everything will be treated for free. You just have to get there early and try to wait in line. So he gets there, and they end up waiting 5 hours to be seen. And the doctor kind of just explains that Bob needs to be on antibiotics to fight this infection, and that he should be pretty much golden after that. So he goes to pick up the prescription for the antibiotics, and it's like 22 pounds worth of, that's how much it cost. And James explains that at that moment he had only had 30 pounds worth of money to last him the rest of the week from his busking. But he had really grown to like Bob, and Bob seemed to have an affinity for him as well, so he ends up spending the $22 and decides that he's going to take care of Bob for the 2 weeks for the course of the antibiotics, and then he's going to try to find his owner, or if he was a stray, he's going to give him back to the streets, because James is at a moment in his life where he could barely take care of himself. He doesn't feel he could take care of a cat. So the 2 weeks go by, and Bob and him kind of bonded. The antibiotics were done, and he felt really close to the cat, but still didn't feel like he could support him financially or anything like that. So he tries to slowly get Bob to get out of the house. He doesn't really want him in the house anymore, so he starts leaving him outside when he goes busking instead of leaving him inside. And Bob's really smart. He catches on to this, and he's realizing that he's now outside most of the time and not inside with James. So when James is leaving to go on the bus to start his day busking to make some money, Bob actually starts to follow him and follows him through some pretty dangerous crowds and streets. So James sees this and decides, you know what, I'm going to just put him up on my shoulder, see if he likes that, to stay away from the traffic and the buses and all of that stuff. So he does that to cross the street. You know, there's a really big highway that James felt Bob couldn't get across on his own. So brings him across on his shoulders and then says, all right, like, we're splitting up again. I'm going to go busk. If you want to be on the street, you can be on the street. James has to get on a big bus to get to central London that's where he performs. So he gets on the bus, sits down, and then he feels a cat stroke his leg and start purring. And I guess, you know, Bob had jumped on the bus to follow him. So James gives in and is like, okay, fine. I'll bring you, we'll perform together, you can hang out with me, but then after that, that's it. So then they're at their spot where they perform, and he's playing the guitar, and he leaves his guitar case open, I guess for money, but Bob decided to sleep in it. So Bob's curled up in it, sleeping on it, and people really liked this, and they started crowding around James. And James said that he stated throughout the book that almost nobody would give him the time of day. He barely, he would make 20 or 30 pounds on a good day, and nobody stopped to talk to him. He was alone all the time. Everyone would just not make eye contact, look away from him. But with Bob there, everyone was circling around him, and he made a lot of money. He ended up making like 60 or 70 pounds in one day. He said he only worked a couple of hours too. And this was something that made him like realized that Bob was kind of a godsend in his life. It was a good thing. Just to be clear, though, James didn't feel like he was exploiting Bob to make money. He actually genuinely cared for him. It might not have seemed like that because he was trying to get rid of him, but he really had Bob's best interest at heart. He really just wanted him to be with somebody who could better take care of him. So James decided that he's going to start bringing Bob around more to try to make more money, and also he gets to spend time with Bob throughout the day instead of leaving him in the house or leaving him on his own to run around the streets. They were making good money together, and he was able to splurge and buy him some nice food, and bought him a nice harness. He was originally using a shoelace that he took off his shoe and tied around Bob's neck, which is obviously dangerous, but now he has a harness, a collar, bowls, nice food. So in the accommodating shelter, they don't pay rent or anything, but they still are responsible for paying for the utilities. So now they have plenty of money to pay the utilities, and it's going really well. This is a good point to bring up that from the beginning of the book until now, James has been on a methadone program to try to get him off of heroin. So the way that works is methadone doesn't suppress your respiratory system as much. It doesn't have crazy side effects. And they give that to you so you don't crave heroin, so you don't go and look for it. And they give you that program for a while until you're ready to be weaned on to something even less. And in order to do that, you need to go through the withdrawal process. So, yeah, that's just something I needed to bring up at this point. I forgot. James made a pretty big point to bring Bob almost everywhere. He was with him most of the time. Sometimes he'd leave him at home if Bob wasn't feeling up to it. But there was a pretty big statement that James made that stuck out to me. That was, for a long time he didn't care about anyone except for himself. He made money just for the sole purpose of feeding his habit. He didn't call his parents. Nobody from his family knew where he was, knew if he was alive. He was very selfish. He self-stated that. But now he's actually caring for this cat like it's his own child. And there was an event that occurred that kind of was a big realization for James. And James got arrested for illegally busking because he was performing in an area that was not designated for busking, and he ended up getting arrested for it. And they told him if they caught him again illegally busking, that he would go to most likely be imprisoned. And the first thing that came to James's mind was the fact that if he went to prison, there would be nobody there to take care of his cat, Bob. So that was like the moment that he realized that he was kind of going through some changes and that he wasn't being as selfish anymore and that he actually genuinely cared about this cat. So he made a full conscious decision that he's not going to busk anymore, and he's going to try to get a real or a more real job than what he was doing. So what he did was, in London, there's this magazine company. They're called Big Issue, and they're only allowed to hire vulnerable populations. So he had to first prove that he was a vulnerable population. He was homeless and living on the streets, so he qualifies as a vulnerable population. So he's able to work for the Big Issue, and same thing. He gets a designated legal spot to sell the paper, and he was able to bring Bob with him. So Bob's with him the whole time, and they kill it. They do great. They sell 30 to 50 papers a day in pretty bad spots. So they give newbies bad spots, but he was doing very, very well with Bob. And he felt great. He felt like he had a stable work environment. He was able to take care of him and Bob perfectly fine. And the best thing was it was legal. Nobody could hassle him. He didn't run the risk of getting thrown in jail. So this was a huge turning point for James, and he felt that it was actually the time, for him to come off of the methadone to finally become clean. And he felt that he owed it completely to Bob. Like Bob had turned his whole life around, and without him, he doesn't know if he could do it. So he goes and talks to a social worker and the doctors, and they decide that he is in fact ready to come off of the methadone, and so that's the next step. That's the next thing that he has to do, and so he does it, and he locks himself in his flat with a bunch of food and water and video games and Bob. And during the whole withdrawal process, he said it was the worst experience of his life. And every time he said it was the hardest thing to just not leave and go score to make this pain go away. But every time he got that thought, he said Bob would just kind of rub on his leg and kind of bring him back to reality and make him realize that he has to do this for Bob and himself, obviously. But the fact that he wasn't being selfish and doing it for somebody else too was huge, and it was a huge change that he went through, and it was I think the motivating factor that got him through it, because it is very bad. It's very hard to get through those withdrawal symptoms of heroin. So it just goes to show that thinking of this cat like a child really got to him and really got him through this. Now, while this book doesn't directly relate to our leadership and management class, it still has a lot of things that kind of correlate with it. So even though James wasn't, a huge CEO or business owner or, leader of the sort, when he was doing the Big Issue magazine selling, he actually had to kind of run it like a business. He had to become organized. James states that throughout his entire life, he had never saved money. He had never been good with money. He had never planned ahead. He just kind of always lived paycheck to paycheck. And by doing the Big Issue, it actually forced him to think more in the future. He couldn't just live day to day, because the way that the Big Issue worked was you had to buy the papers from the company for $1, £1 per magazine. So that's what the company made. And then on the streets, you would sell them for £2 per magazine. And then each week, a new issue would come out. So all the old issues would be garbage because they're old. So you had to make sure that you didn't buy too many, because if you bought too many, then you wasted a lot of money because you're not going to be able to sell all of them. And then if you buy too few and then you run out, you won't make as much either, because you don't have the magazines to sell. So he actually had to, manage his money and learn how to prioritize time. And it was pretty incredible, because he was homeless for the better part of 10 years, didn't care about business stuff or anything like that. He just got money and spent it. So the fact that he's actually saving and planning for the future and planning to keep his part of the business running in the magazines is it's great. And he credits a lot of that to having Bob come into his life. Now that James is completely sober, he's feeling a lot better about things. He feels like he's better, like he just has a greater outlook on things. He thinks colors are more vivid. Life is more worth living. Like, he's just generally happy. something he said he hadn't felt in a long time. And at this moment in the book, his mom sends him a letter saying that she misses him and she wants to, talk to him. And at this point, she lived in Australia while he lived in North London. She said she would pay for the ticket and everything. And the first thing that crossed his mind was, oh, I can't go because I can't bring Bob. So, that's it, I can't go. But then that selfishness that he lost made him think, in his mom's perspective, she hasn't seen him in a long time. She doesn't know how he's doing. So he contacts his ex-girlfriend, Belle, who had met Bob a few times, and said, can you take care of him while I go to Australia for 6 weeks? And he went, and his parents, his mom and dad, didn't know that he was homeless at all, didn't know that he was a drug addict, knew none of this. And he came clean while he was there and had a real connecting moment with his mom, and they bonded, and he felt like he was really close to her again. And he stayed in Australia for 6 weeks and didn't stress about anything, just enjoyed the landscapes and swam and relaxed, and then came back to London, and Bob was there waiting for him, and he said he just felt like a new person. This whole experience had just completely and utterly changed him. The reason I chose this book for the review was simply because the story sounded interesting. Dr. Black had explained part of it in class, and I just really wanted to know what happened to this homeless man who found a cat and turned his life around. That was the primary motivation for why I chose this book. And then just to talk about some things that I felt like how the book affected me was there were a couple statements that James made that really stuck with me while reading. And one of them was that he felt that people were more compassionate towards animals living on the street than homeless people. And there's this huge stigma that surrounds homelessness. And, people won't make eye contact with them, won't look at them. They won't give them money because they feel that that's going to go straight towards alcohol or drugs. And James makes a statement that says, if you feel that way, then just go, if you want to do something kind, just go buy them a hot coffee on a cold day, or go buy them a sandwich. And, you don't even know. This could completely turn it around for them. You don't know when the last time they had a hot meal was. So just be respectful, too. People yell at them and curse at them, tell them to get real jobs. But, if it was as easy as that, then they obviously would have just done it. They obviously had a lot of turmoil in their life and unstable living environments. And at the end of the day, just, you have to be respectful. And just don't assume the worst in people either, because obviously James was a good guy. He just, throughout his life, he made a couple of wrong decisions. Things didn't pan out for him, and he ended up going down a dark road. He was lucky enough to find an awesome companion that would help him get out of it. But that was just a huge thing that stuck out to me in the book, was that humans would be more compassionate towards an animal than they would their fellow human. Another thing that I felt was a quality of James that kind of portrayed itself throughout the book was his perseverance. Despite all of the hardships that he went through, in his early life in the 90s and early 2000s, he was really able to just, he knew that he had to make money in order to feed himself, to feed Bob, and to pay the utilities around his house. So he really, kept working. Throughout the book, if it was raining out or really cold, he would still go out and work, because he knew that if he didn't, that Bob wouldn't get what he needed and he wouldn't get what he needed, and that was it. So he was very not selfish during that part, because he would push through and persevere through hard times to make sure that he was doing the best that he could, and would give whatever he could to him and Bob. And I really respected that quality, because I know for me, if it was raining and pouring and cold out, I wouldn't want to go outside and perform or try to sell magazines. So the fact that he did, and just kept persevering through it all, was really incredible. And I feel that perseverance that he showed is something that I can kind of utilize in the future. PT school alone has not been very easy, but we've all had to persevere through it in order to achieve our goals. And I'm sure that with whatever jobs we land in the future, we're gonna have to push through some tough areas, especially in the beginning. You're not gonna know the new job. You're gonna maybe you'll be in a new setting that you're not familiar with, a new software for all sorts of stuff, and you're gonna just have to push through and keep working hard. And as far as the patients go, there's gonna be patients that are easy or more difficult, and regardless, you're gonna have to critically think on the spot and just work really, really hard. So I think that was a characteristic of James that I really respected, and I hope in the future I can kind of carry it over into physical therapy as well.